Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Evan Lynch, Enterprise Ireland's Market Advisor for Global Online Marketplaces, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to today's webinar, Exploring Online Marketplaces, US Regional Focus, our final marketplace webinar for 2023. And to start off the session, I hope those that were in attendance at last week's event with Amazon enjoyed it thoroughly and took a lot away from it. In today's rapidly evolving business landscape, online marketplaces play a pivotal role in shaping global commerce. As we delve into the vast opportunities that the US market presents, our aim, as always, is to provide you with valuable insights and strategies to navigate and succeed in this dynamic environment. Throughout this session, we will explore key trends, challenges, and best practices for leveraging online marketplaces, with a particular emphasis on the unique dynamics within the United States. Whether you're a seasoned exporter or just beginning to explore international markets, there's something for everyone in our discussion today. Our distinguished speakers and experts are here to share their knowledge and experiences, offering practical advice to you that you can apply to your own business strategies. We encourage active participation, so feel free to ask questions and engage with our speakers during the Q&A session. Today, we are joined by Frank Vandenberg, our marketplace specialist, who after 3 marketplace webinars, I hope no longer needs to be introduced. Frank is a fundamental part of our Introduction to Marketplaces program, and over the last number of months has been working with Enterprise Ireland to bring relevant information to inform our clients of the opportunity marketplaces present to potential Irish sellers. It is also my pleasure to introduce our second speaker today, Riley, a seasoned professional with over 13 years of experience at Westbound. Having navigated through various departments within the organization, our speaker brings a wealth of knowledge and a deep insight into the world of operations and freight logistics. Throughout his career, he has not only witnessed the evolution of the industry, but actively contributed to it. His comprehensive understanding of the nuances of freight operations has uniquely positioned him to lead a team of experts. This team specializes in assisting e-commerce sellers as they embark on their journey to set up on different marketplaces and e-commerce programs, providing e-commerce platforms, providing invaluable guidance on the often complex and crucial aspects of logistics. And finally, we're joined by Peter Mantell, renowned for his extensive expertise in US sales and tax, and brings a human-first approach to his role as the founder and CEO of Ampersand Accounting. His leadership extending globally is marked by significant contributions to innovative tax solutions like Aqueduct, a groundbreaking automation platform in the tax realm. Beyond his technical acumen, Peter's leadership history is peppered with roles demonstrating his ability to connect with people and lead teams across diverse cultural landscapes. His personable and knowledgeable demeanor, combined with a rich tapestry of global leadership experience, makes him not only a respected expert in his field, but also highly approachable and engaging figure, ideal for insightful interactions at professional events. Without further ado, let's embark on this journey of US discovery together. Thank you for joining us, and let's make the most of this opportunity to expand our understanding of the thriving world of online marketplaces in the United States. Now let's get started, and without further delay, I'll hand the microphone to Frank to kick off the session.
Great, thank you very much, Evan. And in case people are wondering, we will make there's a video being made of this presentation, but also the slides are available for distribution if you're interested also. In front of you on the content, you see the 5 steps you will be taking today. I'll be talking to you about the opportunity and the seller's journey. And in doing so, like Evan said, focus on those things that are very specific for the United States. When I talk about the opportunity, I split that in 2 parts. Why the United States and why marketplaces? So first of all, why the United States? get that right. Okay. The key thing undoubtedly is that the United States is massive, and it's still going to grow further. It's the second largest e-commerce country in the world. It has literally surpassed 1 trillion sales in e-commerce in 2022, and it is still going to grow as a percentage of total retail. So e-retail as percentage of total retail in the United States is forecasted to grow to 33, let's say 34% over the next 4 years. So that's a very significant growth. Of course, we are familiar with the culture in the country in many ways. It is one country, although there are 52 individual states, and we will hear about that later. Also, it is a sophisticated market. So if you need a specific solution for something, specific marketplace, distribution solution, whatever it might be, it is probably available. Second point of the question, of course, is why marketplaces? And again, it is the issue of the size and the growth. Marketplaces take more than 50% of all online sales in the United States at the moment. Now, that includes seller and vendor sales. You know, Amazon sometimes sells products directly. That is included in this 50%. But marketplaces are 50% already of e-commerce, of this growing piece of e-commerce. Marketplaces are 50%, and it is forecast to grow further. Globally, and that is the same in the United States, marketplaces are forecasted to deliver 1/3 of all retail growth over the next 3 years. So e-commerce is eating retail, but marketplaces are eating e-retail. Now that is really for two other reasons, and I want to focus on that second point. The third point you can read, but often people think about marketplaces as, yes, that's where people like to go to buy products, but that is no longer the case anymore. Marketplaces provide a benchmark for anybody in retail, whether that's in e-commerce or even outside e-commerce. And there is some research available now, the sources are provided there, that say that marketplaces now setting the benchmark, they're setting the scene for the purchase, but also for the place where people get inspiration for shopping and where they search for products. So it's not that marketplaces are just a cheap sales channel. That is not the case anymore. They are the marketing, sales, inspiration benchmark for e-customers. That's more generic. Let's have a look at the structure of the marketplace. And I need to build this up a little bit in steps. First of all, what you see here are the 10 largest marketplaces in the United States. The top 2 are not different from Europe, but the rest is different. This is measured in visits per month, because that's the only thing that is available consistently per month for all of these marketplaces. I know it's not the same as sales, but it is consistent. It gives you a good idea. And what it shows here is the top 10 marketplaces and the share of each of these marketplaces as part of these top 10. And what you see is very clearly there is one very dominant player, and that's Amazon. The top 3, that's Amazon, eBay, and Walmart, all 3 of them are more general marketplaces, and the 3 of them take up about 75 to 80% of the marketplace visits. What you see also, though, that's quite interesting, that the number 4 and in the middle segment, where you have less than 10% share, there is the arts and crafts, Etsy, and homeware in the United States has some really big marketplaces. The people that participated in the European webinar some time ago will probably remember that yet Zalando, which is massive in Europe and is number 3 or 4 in Europe in terms of visits. You don't have a big fashion marketplace here, you have StockX. But in the United States, the structure is slightly different. But it is not all about total sales and size. And I will have a few more comments on that in a minute. What I wanted to show you is some marketplaces which you can choose, that you can maybe have a look at within your segment. And what you see here on the left-hand side are the top generalist players, Amazon, eBay, Walmart, but also Target and Wish. We can talk about these a little bit longer if you want to just ask a question later. But these are more the generic marketplace. Each have their pros and the cons. But then what I've also done for you to help you on your journey to find the best marketplace for your products, I've identified the segment specialist on the right-hand side. Fashion, so StockX, Postmark, electronics, homeware, art, and music. So if you're in any of these segments, here are some companies, some marketplaces you can look at. However, I want to make a few comments before I move over to the next slide, because although this is a great overview, it is not everything you need to know. There are at least another 20 marketplaces for each of those segments. It is also important to note that while Amazon is massive, much bigger than Newegg, for instance, Newegg might be bigger in electronics than Amazon is. Wayfair is definitely bigger in furniture than Amazon is. So within the segments, there are other players that are actually dominant in a market segment. And that should help you to not just look at Amazon and eBay, but also start looking at the segment specialists. And another point here is that size, even within its segment, is not critical. It's not the only thing, because some marketplaces have specific conditions that might interest you or might exclude you. Some of them have a higher subscription fee than others. Amazon takes 15%, Etsy takes less, sometimes 10%. So those are all things that are relevant. Not size matters, but profit break-even matters. We can talk maybe a little bit later in the Q&A how you go about identifying the best marketplaces for you. The next slide I will leave in the slide pack for you to read. There is just one thing I wanted to mention in the trends that we are seeing in marketplaces. That's this one. I know Irish companies are big in health, and in the market, Irish industry is strong in health and personal care, for instance. Maybe food and beverage is also, but in the United States, those are the two segments identified in e-commerce that are forecasted to grow most. So if you're in that segment, the United States is definitely an area to look at. Good. That was the introduction to the marketplaces. In an earlier webinar, the introduction to marketplaces, we identified the 6 questions for the seller's journey. And one of them was question 4. Do you have the right capabilities? And that's a bit of a segue to the next speakers, and I will explain to you why. Do you have the right capabilities? And we identified, together with Evan and some other people, we identified our really 5: strategic mindset, marketing skills, customer service skills, the logistic piece, and then the finance, the sales tax, the VAT, and the legal piece. And for the United States, the logistics and the VAT, the sales tax piece, are very different, very, very important for success. So this is a great segue for me to start introducing the next speakers. And we start with Riley, who is going to talk to us about the sales supply, the logistic piece. After that, we move over to the sales tax. Riley, over to you.
Thank you, Frank. Good slides there. So yeah, hi, I'm Riley. And obviously shipping is quite a broad subject, and different marketplaces, as Frank's just said there, they come with slightly different procedures to deliver to them. But in all, what I've done in this slide deck is to give you the basics of moving goods into the US. And also I've based most of it on delivering into Amazon, for example, because as Frank's his stats showed there, they have a huge dominance out in the US. So I thought I'd do these slides around that, because the majority of people will use FBA. And then obviously I've put a bit in there about storing in another warehouse to use and drip feed the other marketplaces anyway. So yeah, so basically when starting in a new market, it's always good to know and look into what you need to move into that country. So these next few slides, I'm going to sort of give you the basics of the 3 things that you definitely need to move out into the US. The first one being, if I could have the next, yeah. So are you set up as a foreign entity? So setting up in the US isn't as difficult as, say, Europe has proved to be, especially after Brexit for the UK anyway. So to move goods into the US, you need to get an EIN number. So to get that, you just need a form and you can register your Ireland address and your business address out in Ireland to the US, and you can get yourself what is known as an importer of record or an EIN number, and that allows you to move goods into the US and clear through their customs. So another big one would be to check duty rates. Obviously, duty rates differ in each different marketplace. So, for example, if you're moving your goods directly from China to the US, then you could inherit and take on the Trump tax, which it got brought in during his reign, sorry. And basically, it could be a 25% additional duty rate on your commodity. So it's definitely worth checking into that to make sure that it's still viable to get your goods over into that marketplace. So the next thing would be a customs bond. So there's two ways of doing it. You can either have a single entry bond. So this bond basically is a percentage of the duties and taxes that you pay. And there's two ways to go around it. If you're going to import into the US more than 4 times in a calendar year, we would suggest getting an annual bond. So you pay in a lump sum a smaller amount, or if you want to test the market, you can start up with getting a single entry bond, which would just be a slight percentage of your commercial invoice. But your forwarder, whoever's moving the goods out into the US, should explain this in a little bit more detail. And they can talk you through whether they think it's worth you getting an annual one or pay the single entry. And then the last thing would be a power of attorney. So the power of attorney basically gives a customs broker out in the States permission to clear on your EIN number, and basically that allows you to bring the goods into the country. So although that sounds complicated, them 3 things, honestly, it's not. Any forwarder would help you get set up. We can do it. It's literally 3 forms, and you're good to go, really. So then what we say is, so when you're moving goods out to the States, it would be the same as any marketplace. So what we recommend is trying to order more stock and storing it locally out in the US. What the reasons behind this, the first one being the main one, is you get a cheaper cost per unit. And you're also, by doing that, you can store in a warehouse that isn't Amazon, and then because Amazon comes with stock limits, for example, and we can drip feed into your Amazon account as your stock gets low, and then that keeps your ratings high, and obviously it's easier to replenish, which I think I touched on in the next slide as well. And getting that cost per unit is also important. So with shipping as well, if you're sending smaller shipments, and keeping basically, if you send smaller shipments a lot, then you're going to be getting a higher cost per unit because of minimum shipping charges. So it's definitely best to move a couple of pallets at a time, store locally, and I think that'll be the best cost per unit, and it'll be easier to replenish as well. So booking process, it should work like any other shipment you've got. So whether you're importing or exporting already, if you've got yourself a good forwarder, you would tell them that you've got goods ready. We can move goods directly to the US from any country. And it's pretty simple as long as you get yourself a forwarder who can move your goods out there for you. So timescales to the US. What we recommend doing would be to move in directly. Say if your goods are made in the Far East, we would recommend you moving directly out to the States. It's a quicker transit, and also you avoid paying the double duties on the products. The main transport route. So if you're exporting from Ireland, for example, you normally get WD4, which is a Chicago Amazon. So if you're moving that from Dublin, it's a 22-day port, and then you've got to allow, say, a week either side, to make sure that the goods are cleared and the delivery process in. Now, Amazon, for example, they can cause headache, especially around Q4. It's around 7 to 14 days at the minute to even get goods into Amazon because of their Christmas rush. So it's definitely worth building that into your shipping schedules. From the Far East, which is what I touched upon earlier, it's easier to move goods from the Far East. It's a 14-day transit into LA. So what we recommend is we've actually got our own 3PL in LA. So if you could use our address for your ship from address within the Amazon Center, it allows you to get goods into a California DC. So you're looking at 14 days port to port and then a week on top of that. So it's a lot quicker. So if you are just moving it directly to a marketplace like Amazon's, that would be the best way to do it. Obviously, if your goods are from Asia, for example, a majority of people are moving directly from there. So just a brief outline of what Amazon would require. So labels, so each carton would have to be labeled with your Amazon labels. If you're moving in pallets, then we can palletize upon arrival. And obviously they need to be on 4-way standard pallets. But again, if you are, say, for example, moving to Amazon, you can check this on the Seller Central because this does change all the time. And again, I know that this is vague and it's very Amazon based, but I wanted to give you a brief outline of what the majority of people are doing. But if you wanted to move to, say, Walmart, for example, we can handle that exactly the same way. So they will require labels and slightly different requirements. But again, any questions on that, you can just ask me directly. And what Frank was touching on, which I think is important, is moving stock into a 3PL rather than just delivering it all to a marketplace like Amazon is really, really important. So what that allows you to do is it allows you to sell within different marketplaces, and that's something that we can offer. So if you moved it into, say, a 3PL like ours, then you could pick stock to send to somewhere like eBay's distribution, or sorry, B2C for eBay, or you could move it into Walmart's fulfillment. And we can basically handle that from ourselves, and we can palletize as well to Amazon spec and move. So basically what I'm trying to say is different marketplaces have different rules, but using someone like us, we can definitely help with getting your goods through. And that's it. I know it's rather vague at the moment, but again, I could speak for hours on shipping and the logistics process, but it seems a lot more complicated than it is. So if you do have any questions, please reach out, and I'm sure I can help.
Well, thank you, Riley. That was a whirlwind tour through the logistics and import into the United States. Very clear, very interesting. Thank you for that. And yes, just one point there is that I totally agree with you that if you can have a central warehouse somewhere from which you feed into Amazon and other marketplaces, that is also something that we recommend. Okay, moving over to the next part of our presentation, we talked about the different capabilities, the different skills that you need as a company to start being successful on marketplaces. One of them is the understanding of finance, tax, legal aspects. Well, the key thing we're going to focus on in the next 10 minutes is that sales tax. And for that, we have an expert there with Peter Mantell. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Frank. An absolute pleasure to meet everybody today. Sales tax, or indirect taxes, as we refer to it in the United States, is a convoluted and complex subject. So my job is to take 10 minutes, or within 10 minutes, kind of give you a basic understanding of what that is. Let's go to the next slide, please. So let's talk about the comparisons and contrasts of US versus VAT, US sales tax. In the world of compliance, the two systems operate very different. Europe operates with a VAT model of, we're going to try to inform you as much as possible and make you as educated as capable, and the compliance process as simple as possible, so that you don't have an excuse not to comply. In the US, it's the Wild West. It's you know, it's a game of punches and counter punches with states. And do they catch you or don't they catch you? The states are not under the premonition it's their responsibility to inform you. In the US, it's your responsibility to be informed. And the reason of this is that the states love keeping wiggle room for areas that we call penalties and interest. If there's a delayed filing, there's something missing, this gives them that extra revenue. So the states operate very much so in the US when it comes to what US VAT is, or sales and use tax, very much under that I gotcha premonition. Now, let's go into definitions and basic things as far as the nexus aspect. Everyone understands economic and physical nexus. They understand. Just go back one slide. Yeah, next. There was this full aspect about physical nexus. So when you sell through Amazon FBA, for example, they take your inventory and they send it wherever they want to send it throughout the United States. Now, this creates complexity for retailers because there was a ruling by the highest court in the US, also known as the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court originally, I think it was in 1992, came in and said that out-of-state entities, so third-party retailers that don't reside or operate within the state, don't have a responsibility to collect net sales tax. Fast forward to 2018, and the Supreme Court had changed their prior 1992 ruling, and they gave the states what we call in the legal term carte blanche, which meant that the states at this point can enact their own laws and policies, and there's no ramifications. Now, back in 1992, though, the Supreme Court left one variable there that states could go after, and it was called the bright line test. The bright line test is effectively if you have a person, place, or thing operating within the confines of the state, then by definition, you have what they call physical nexus, and you need to collect or remit sales tax in that state. That wasn't enough for the states in light of some of the changes and external sellers, and they started to enact another law called economic nexus in various states. In this definition, if you have a certain de minimis volume of sales or transactions, now states in the United States can actually assert that you have a responsibility to collect or net sales tax. And these laws of indirect taxes are not protected under any tax treaties between the United States and Europe. All right, next slide, please. So how does this all influence everything then? What does this mean for you? If you're selling through solutions such as Amazon, eBay, Walmart into the United States, those are what we define in the US as marketplaces. Now, to add to the complexity, states have negotiated directly with these entities, and they've created what they call marketplace facilitator laws. These laws allot for states to allow the marketplaces themselves to directly collect and remit the sales tax in your behalf. A lot of retailers misunderstand this and say, awesome, that's awesome, then I'm already in compliance thanks to the marketplaces, and it's not accurate. The marketplaces are not responsible for reporting the sales tax they collect on your behalf. They're responsible for just collecting and remitting. So the states still do not have a means to be able to better understand your transactional volumes in the US. Now, why is sales tax so important in the United States? It's simple. It helps us to report our economics up to the federal level. So sales tax is how the US actually tracks its own economics based off the volume of sales. Next slide, please. So then the question comes into play often. We've discussed the marketplace facilitator aspect of things. We've discussed the types of nexus. Now we're going to go into, a piece that Riley had touched on, and Frank, and honestly, I do not envy their shoes in this aspect, which is import duties and tariffs, getting products into the United States. To add to the complexity, the US has a law called the Jones Act, which makes it next to impossible for logistics providers that aren't US based to do any logistics within the US, meaning that any form of transportation across the United States has to be done by US entities. This increased costs for the US entities, increased duties and tariffs and other such. So oftentimes the question that we get as Ampersand is, can you help us with the duties and tariffs? And the long and short is no, those are different reporting agencies, and they have different criteria from the indirect taxes, sales and use tax, if you will. So we do not assist with that part, but that's where O'Reilly becomes a very influential individual in what we're doing because of the fact that they can assist you in maneuvering that aspect of the compliance. Next slide, please. So when is sales tax actually collected in the US? And that's a great question. VAT goes through a series of stages from the supply chain and up for collection. In the US, it has some commonalities, but also has some contrasts. So when we look at for example, in VAT situation, they're tracking how the inventory moves through everything. On the US side, the governments are not tracking how the inventory moves. That's actually on the retailer to track all that and to keep concise records of that for reporting purposes. Now, data should not be commingled from one state to another. So if in the event you're doing or have an issue with the state of New York, the advice that we give every retailer is do not share Virginia, Texas, California, Florida information with the state of New York. So we talk about the necessity of keeping everything clean and concise, broken down by state. Additionally, when is the sales tax collected? The objective in the US is to have the sales tax collected by the end user. Now, in some cases, you'll have third-party distributors moving the products to other marketplaces or platforms. And as long as they are able to supply something called a resale certificate, they don't have to actually pay sales tax on the inventory they acquire. They only, the charge is at the end of the actual transaction, which means the end user in this case pays it at the very end. And then the business actually reports it to the states. Now, here's one thing that is very different from the US than VAT that I'm aware of, is that the US, the states will actually, in some states, refund you money against that sales tax revenue you collected. And it's what we call a collector's discount. So effectively, states acknowledge that you have compliance fees and they offset your costs by giving you a little bit of that revenue back through offsetting the sales tax revenue that you collected in their behalf. The one big thing in all this I'll share on this one piece is that the objective is to avoid in the United States double taxation, as it would produce inaccurate economics. So laws in the US always are in favor of a single taxation point. And when a second point is identified, a refund must be remitted. Next slide, please. The US has one area that is extremely complicated compared to the VAT system, which is when we calculate rates, Europe has a flat rate usually for the entire country. By this definition, the United States has 11,000 different countries, effectively. And so we have 11,000 different jurisdictions that have their own unique governments with their own unique policies and rules and everything. So within one state, you're still dealing with thousands of entities at any given time. Trying to take this on as you're, by yourself is extremely complex, and probability is a third party outside of the United States is a task that's not going to be set up for your success. Now, rate calculations get very complicated. Not only do we have 11,000 different jurisdictions, but we have what they call origin and destination calculations, meaning that depending on the state, some states will calculate the tax on where you're shipping from. Other states will actually calculate the tax where you're shipping to. And then other states will calculate the tax on where you're shipping from and shipping to. So California, I'm looking at you. So there's some complexity here, nuance, not only with the compliance and filings aspect, but also with the calculations and making sure things are being properly remitted. Next slide, please. So usually the US operates under a premonition of all taxing goods are at this point in time taxable events until otherwise defined. And what that means is that we have certain categories and definitions in the United States per state that will indicate if a product is taxable or not. Majority of products are taxable, but products such as supplements in some states, or food, or clothing, or products that are available for school preparation will have tax holidays and other such. Next slide. Additionally, the US, because of our policy with economics and everything else, we have very strong criteria to refund when overcollections are made. The objective of this, again, is to make sure that the accurate amount is being charged and not just a bunch of money going in. So anytime accountants or other such can identify discrepancies or deltas, they can go back to the states and actually recoup that money for your business. Next slide, please. So the objective here, some of the similarities are consumption taxes, which we have here, or gross receipts taxes, as they call them. in certain states like Washington, Texas, etc. Those are business and occupancy taxes, and that's the US's state definition. And I'm gonna have a chuckle when I say this, and you're gonna have a chuckle, but it's kind of a maniacal chuckle, which is that it's the right to collect that sales tax or pay that tax to be a citizen of that location. And in some states they call it a privilege tax. So it's kind of unique and interesting. Next slide, please. So in closing, effectively, when we talk about the degree and variances of types of taxes, as well as the criteria for compliance, it can be complicated, but in the same regard, there are benefits to doing it. And as Frank has discussed, the monetary benefits from volume and size of sales into the United States usually far exceeds any other market. In closing, thank you for your time, and we look forward to answering any tax-related questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. I am so glad that our experts that can help us navigate this very complex topic. So thank you very much for that, Peter. The next point on the agenda are two issues left on the agenda, which is much more the interactive part of the panel discussion, where the four presenters will be responding to some questions that Evan is going to ask. And then in the Q&A, we will then have time to run through questions that the audience might have for any of the experts. In the meantime, Evan, when you want to ask us some questions, in the meantime, I'll put in the contact details of all of us up for you to make some notes on if you want to. Evan, over to you.
Yeah, sure. The favorite part of the webinars, where I get to put the guest speakers on the spot by asking them somewhat awkward questions. But I just want to let the attendees know, if you have any questions, if you start filling in the Q&A box, and we can get to them during the Q&A session. But Frank, as I see you are unmuted, that means you are ready for the first question. So just by looking through the slides that you have presented, we can see that Amazon is the key marketplace in America. But being present on this marketplace isn't part of everybody's e-commerce strategy, nor does selling on Amazon guarantee success. So my question is, how would you go about choosing the correct marketplace for sellers if a company comes to you and they're like, right, we have a product and we want to sell it on a marketplace? How do you go about choosing the correct one, and what kind of questions would you ask them to get to that decision?
Yeah, the questions that we run through is first of all, you're trying to understand what products really companies are selling, but the owners, the people on the call will clearly know that. And then it is really, I normally suggest people work with a long list and then reduce it to a short list and then make that choice. And the long list is really to do with, okay, go on Google, type in marketplaces for fashion in the United States, you might get 5. You can look at the slides that I presented today. There are some marketplaces listed there. Maybe speak to one of the experts, 2 or 3 experts, just discuss that. Gives you a long list. But then the other thing you can do, and I like that, is look at some of your comparators, some of your competitors, or people that sell your type of product already in the United States, because that will give you some names also. So then you have your long list. But then you really need to start diving deeper. And for instance, if you sell arts and crafts, to come back to the same example, you can definitely sell them on Amazon. But if you start diving deeper, you also can sell them on Etsy, and actually there you pay less commission. Now, I'm not saying that Etsy is better on all of the other things than Amazon, because it isn't. Etsy does, I don't believe, have its own FBA comparison solution. And that, of course, is strong for Amazon. So you really need to start looking at the different things that the different marketplaces offer and ask for. Some marketplaces say, well, you can apply, but whether we take you on or not, that's another question. Whereas on Amazon, you normally get in once you go through the application process. So from that long list, you start looking at things, you get your short list, and then I suggest you just start applying and see where you can get in. And if you have 3, you can choose. If you have 1 left, that's the one to go for. Does it answer your question? And is anybody else, Peter or Riley, that have any ideas on this?
We'll take that as a no. So my next question is for Riley, and I think this is incredibly topical because Black Friday is next week, and Cyber Monday is soon to follow, and then we're into that busy Christmas rush. It's how can Irish sellers effectively manage or efficiently manage their inventory to avoid being overstocked or being understocked when selling on US online marketplaces?
Well, that's a tricky one. Or I don't really envy the sellers having to keep on top of stock, to be honest. Just it goes back to it. You don't want to be overstocked. I get that, but I definitely think that in terms of a shipping point of view, it's better to have that stock out there locally because you don't know what the market's going to do if you have a sudden increase in sales. Because the worst thing you could do from a shipping point of view is start rushing and having to pay for air freight out of your product because all of a sudden your profit margins are getting absolutely obliterated. And just to keep on top of your stock, you're having to take a big hit on your profits. So I would always try and have this third-party warehouse. So you're getting mainly a third-party warehouse. You're going to have a cheaper storage rate than, say, using an Amazon, for example. Q4 Amazon, they're going to hike their rates up. So if you're storing and drip feeding I would have your 3PL as sort of as your main stock, and then the marketplaces. So you're always topping up your overstock rather than your actual stock within the platforms, and that way you're always going to keep your costs down, and it's going to avoid a lot less stress. To be honest, if you start getting low and having to air freight, that's when problems can happen.
Perfect.
I
Next
think Frank's got a question.
Can I come in on this one, Evan, for 1 second?
Yep.
From the way we look at this and we recommend people, let's start simply. Don't start with 200 products that you then need to keep track of because it gets very complicated very quickly. So start with a smaller range. Once you control that, maybe expand on that. You really have to keep track of not only what you're selling, but of course what you have in stock, and make sure that you keep track of that. If you still run out of stock on the marketplace, that's not really handy because once you run out of stock, and if you don't signal that to the customers, Amazon, for instance, will penalize you for that. But you need to know what you do if you run out of stock, because sometimes that is inevitable, that will happen. But you can switch your listing off so it's not open for sales, for instance. That is always preferable than to have it listing live and then not be able to supply. So I just wanted to add those things to Riley, but I do agree with Riley, have local stock available to quickly resupply if you can.
There's actually more complexity from a compliance perspective as well. Certain states actually require you to report inventory stored in that state. So you need to be aware of it also for compliance aspects as well. Looking at Washington, some aspects, a couple of other states where they want you to report roughly about how much inventory you have stored there.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so my next question is for Peter. A simple one at that to begin with, for our tax questions. So what are the steps for Irish sellers to register for tax purposes in the US, and are there specific forms and documentation required? And then kind of secondly to that question, where can these forms be found? Because you did mention Europe, EU, they're trying to inform us how to do it. US might be slightly different. You might have to dig a bit deeper to find these forms, documents that are needed.
So the long and the short is, first and foremost, kind of like a boxing match. You got to size up the opponent. In this case, it's the states, if you would. And so you have to kind of understand what you're walking into before you begin going into the market. Things that need to be assessed are, for example, are you already currently operating in the United States or not? And if you have been operating, what kind of sales have you been doing in the United States? Additionally, do you have inventory placed anywhere in the US? So usually what a good accounting firm will do, especially in the sales tax and indirect taxes space, is they will first analyze your situation and better understanding the best route for clearing the compliance, if you will. the objective of United States accountants and people that operate in the space is to save the business as much money as possible and make sure that the business doesn't have to pay more than is due in the United States from a taxation standpoint. If you were to go about it yourself as a hypothetical, as long as you were to research and understand the different terms of nexus and your compliance landscape in the US, then you can go about the process of registering with a state. Now, you can register as a foreign entity, or you can register as a US-based entity. From a sales tax perspective, the US states do not care whether you have income tax or other obligations.
Do you need to register in each state, Peter, or is one sales tax registration sufficient?
Every state sales tax registration is unique. So
you have to apply, if you sell in 52 states, you have to apply for the tax number. Okay.
Uniquely and separately for each one of those. Now let's add to the fun of that some of those states may ask if you're incorporated in the US or not, depending on how your operations actually work. And then you're really going to need like a Riley to help you get set up with income and some other pieces there, especially with something called a 10 Ben or a Ben form, which effectively allots for you as a foreign entity to just get an EIN and then offset your taxes between the tax treaties between the United States and the UK or Europe. Now, one thing that needs to be understood is that today, none of the sales tax is actually protected by any tax treaties between the United States and anybody. So as of today, sales tax are not protected in any way, shape, or form. They have to be addressed by the third party regardless of location.
Interesting.
Sorry, that was a lot. Effectively, what I was saying is analyze the situation, register where applicable, move on.
You've left me speechless. Frank, I want to ask you a second question. So to date, we've completed, well, this is our 4th webinar. 3 of these webinars covering the regions of strategic importance for Enterprise Ireland clients and their export journey. So how would you, as an expert, assess the opportunity that America presents to our clients? And how does this differ to the other regions we've looked at, i.e. the United Kingdom and Europe as a whole?
Okay, that's a tough question. I think the answer comes down to 2 levels. If you look at it generally speaking, for Irish companies, and Evan, you have given me some of these thoughts yourself, is the UK is a massive trading partner. So the UK seems to be an easy first time to look at, especially before Brexit. I will still think UK is probably something that Irish companies will start looking at first because it's close by, the language issues. But I think the next step could be Europe. But I also know that Irish companies almost look more to the west than to the east. I don't really fully know why that is, but that's what I'm sensing from an Irish perspective. And then, well, the United States is massive. But the thing is, size is not that important. I mean, if you need, let's say, 500,000 euros in sales to break even, you can get it in UK, in Europe, or in the United States. Another level of complexity is China. That's massive, but that's even more complex in many ways than the other 3 combined. So that's it in total, the complexity factor of these different regions. But within that, most importantly, of course, is what is available for each individual company. I mean, as a company, you could talk, and we have done some of this research for one company, say, okay, do a market approach plan, do the research in 3 regions, make an initial business case, how do we go to market, and what is then the easiest, where are the lowest hanging fruits? And that really differs by product and by company. That is really, really hard to say. So there are some general points I can make, but it really depends on what the company is selling and how unique it is. And what is unique in America might not be unique in China and the other way around. So it's a tough question to answer, Evan.
I said favorite part of the webinar.
You said so, yeah.
I would share just to kind of dovetail on what Frank was saying. We represent a lot of European entities in the U.S. From a compliance standpoint, and what we see is they usually, depending on the market, they're targeting and the preparation they've done to what Frank has said. They're 10xing their sales from the U.S. in the U.S. from other locations because of larger audience of consumers. I would argue, though, as to what Frank was alluding to, very forthright, was a little bit of conservatism in the sense of understanding the lay of the land before just jumping in there. If you're doing small sales from Europe into the U.S., that's not going to be a problem. But as your sales start to creep up, or you start to put infrastructure in the United States, it's a quid pro quo kind of system. So as you do something, something else happens. And so it's extremely important to understand, yeah, you can 10x in the United States, but are you going to spend all that money just getting right and complying because you didn't properly handle it out of the gate?
I think that's such a valid point, Peter, and it's part of what Enterprise Island stands for also, is that do the research beforehand, do the planning beforehand, get input on your business plan from the different people, from the tax, from the marketplace, from the logistics perspective, product approval perspective, and only jump in there. It is really much better to take 4 months of time to prepare for things than spend 4 months of time trying to clean up the mess afterwards. So totally agree with you.
Yeah, next question for Riley. What are the key considerations for selecting a reliable shipping partner for cross-border e-commerce, and especially looking at the US market?
Well, it's actually, I was going to jump in there as well, but it's exactly going back to what Frank and Peter just said about getting set up in the correct way. So we had a company that come onto us, and we helped them. They chose US as the marketplace, and before they started coming to Westbound, they were moving out on DDP terms, so moving directly from China through to the US through a Chinese forwarder, but unfortunately they were misdeclaring the duties. So I suppose I wonder if Peter's seen this before anyway. So the duties were being underdeclared. It's actually the seller's responsibility to make sure they're paying the correct duties. And they came to us with a letter from the United States, basically trying to reclaim, I think the amount was 6 figures on underdeclared duties. And they were saying, well, what can Westbound do about this? And the answer is nothing. They hadn't set up properly in the first place. They hadn't been explained correctly about the liabilities of using the incorrect duty code, for example, and it has a massive knock-on effect on the business. And I think just using a reliable forwarder is having people on the ground and contacts on the ground that can explain the exact process needed to make sure that your goods are getting into that country in a manner that works for that marketplace, because the last thing you need is big bills, unexpected costs that could send your business back 10 years or even worse case scenarios, put you out of business because of the amount of money owed.
And just because they hit you with an assessment doesn't necessarily mean they're right.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've seen different various people hit with assessments, and they were dead wrong. The states will sometimes they operate under a premonition of, pardon my U.S. expressionism on this one, kill them all, let God sort them out. And so the way they kind of do some of these things is they just throw assessments at you or some pretty nasty correspondences, and then it's your job to prove they're wrong. And so we see that a lot. It's not abnormal, these types of complexities, and you absolutely need somebody like Riley really on top of some of that stuff and keeping an eye on it. But if you're not properly categorizing products in the US tax world, we have a saying, which is if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it must be a duck. So they will evaluate based off of what we call substance and form. And based off of substance and form, they will make determinations regardless of what you claim. So that's something to be aware of. What Riley is saying there is most accurate and very true. And it carries also over into the states from the regulatory compliance standpoint as well.
Interesting. Frank, I believe there is a question in the Q&A box, which you may want to take away offline. It is, how do the TV shopping channels compare with the online selling in the US now? We have to appreciate you're a marketplace specialist, but you may want to take that away and
Yeah,
reply
Bring-
back in a follow-up email. If anybody else wants to ask a question, please do so in the Q&A box while we get through maybe one or two more questions.
I wouldn't mind can I just jump in for one second?
Yeah.
Before we go? I mean, one of the things that we have all said in preparation for this webinar and the previous webinar is that when you start talking about these things with the different experts and the generalists, etc., then you suddenly start realizing how everything is really connected and how you really need input from the different specialists, whether it's Riley, Peter, or myself, or other people. And how the dots are connected is something that is hard to see sometimes. And speaking to the different people's help, but that's one of the things we have these webinar and panel discussions for also. And maybe going forward, you have our contact details, so you can speak to each of us individually. And if you want to, we can even get all of us on the telephone to help a client together to make sure that all the connectivities between the different things are covered and that you are really ready to go to the United States. Sorry, Evan, that the connectivity of the different points is so important for me.
Frank, I got ideas that are coming from this conversation, man. We're gonna have to chat after with Riley. So
Okay.
This is interesting and very cool.
Yeah.
I think I'll ask one last question to Peter before we do our closing remarks, and that's right. I've listened to you for the last maybe half an hour, and it is a bit overwhelming, this whole tax situation in America. And I guess people on the webinar and people who are listening to the recording will also agree. But my question is, how can Irish sellers or people who are interested on selling it on Amazon or eBay in the United States or whatever other marketplace, how can they stay up to date on changes in US tax laws that can affect their e-commerce operations? Is there certain websites they can look up? Maybe even follow you on LinkedIn. Maybe you are a source of knowledge.
Ampersand Accounting, our LinkedIn page does provide tax tips and insights when new policies coming down the pike, if you would. Additionally, retailers, in the case of Ireland trying to move into the US, definitely reach out to entities. There's a lot of free content online. You can go to Amazon FBA. Some of the chat forums have some pretty good information from the pain points from US-based e-commerce retailers. So you kind of learn from their experience firsthand. Those communities can be invaluable because they're giving insight based off of their pain points. So I would say the FBA forums, the Shopify forums, eBay forums in the US can be very insightful, and you can also search a lot of those. The MTC, Multi-State Tax Commission, would be a website I'd keep an eye on as well. A lot of the state's policies come from the Multi-State Tax Commission, or MTC. And what it is it's a quasi-governmental entity that all states participate in, if you will, and they discuss policies and other such based off of what they're seeing from current events.
Interesting. Frank, I don't know if you have a slide for the closing remarks, or do you want me? Oh, yeah, here we go.
Yeah, apologies, I didn't take the heading is not correct, but it is the closing remark. There you go.
Yeah, don't worry about that. So essentially, we've looked at four topics today in terms of the US marketplaces. So the opportunity, logistics, taxes, and the marketplaces themselves that are there. We've shown how interconnected, sales tax, logistics, all that sort of stuff is, and it's mind-blowing. So, the purpose of these webinars is to keep everybody informed. It's if you have an interest in marketplaces in the US to give you this kind of sample piece of what you have to look out for when you're creating your strategy, when you're going forward, or if you actually are selling in the United States and you have issues to where you can even go. Like, so we, as I said last time on the European webinar, we're evolving our offering from generic information to specific target information. As I've said, this is the last webinar for 2023, 2024. Our offering will be different. We'll be running webinars on, picking the right marketplace for you, improving your marketplace listings, winning your buy box, addressing the issues that are essentially plaguing our sellers when they are performing on marketplaces, and to try and get everybody to peak performance. Between now and then, myself and Frank will be facilitating free one-to-one consultations to help you overcome your issues, whether it's a soundboarding session for your strategy or your business plan, or it's to address a specific problem. So the spaces are limited, so if you do want one, just please reach out to me and I will facilitate the organization of that. I also want to thank Frank for giving the insightful presentation today on the opportunities in the marketplaces, Peter on his presentation on sales tax and VAT, and Riley on his presentation for logistics. And I want to thank everybody here in attendance for turning up and listening to us. So that is it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.